You're listening to Life, the Universe, and Everything Else. Today on the show, we're talking about fasting.
Life, the Universe, and Everything Else explores the intersection of science and society. Original music is produced by Ian James, and this episode was edited by Marissa McCool. Find her on Patreon at patreon.com/QAF.
My name is Laura Creek Newman, and I'll be your host today. With me today, I have Lauren Bailey.
Hello.
Ashlyn Noble.
Hello.
Special guest, Marissa McCool.
Very forgettable last name.
And I'm also here.
And my wonderful husband, Jem Newman.
Hello.
This is our best intro ever.
I have to say, Jem, you definitely have the air of a disgruntled homeroom teacher. I think I might need to talk to you after the show.
All right. So I'm hosting today, partly because I came across a topic that I don't think we actually talked about fully. So listening to some other podcasts that I generally like, I heard a sponsored ad for something called a 5-day fast, but you're fasting with food. And I was like, wait, what? You're fasting with food? And that got me thinking about, oh, yeah, fasting. That's a thing. That's a big thing. All sorts of things. We should talk about that. And so today we're going to talk all about fasting. This is something that I had looked up for my work life several years ago when things like intermittent fasting really came on the scene and became very popular, and I needed to know this kind of stuff. And then I quickly got very tired of all of it, and I changed jobs and I didn't have to think about it anymore, and that was a great relief. And then I guess I decided to torture myself to go back down this rabbit hole today. But there's a lot more to it than just the mainstream intermittent fastings and what have you types of eating plans that a lot of people hear about today. And the history of fasting is a lot longer than the last decade or so. So to start us off talking about fasting in other contexts, Ashlyn.
Hello. So, weird religious rules have always been one of my sort of special interests, as other episodes of this podcast may attest to. And I had already done quite a bit of sort of pre-reading about various ways that people are not allowed to eat because of their religion. So I just wanted to give a really quick rundown of various religions and the times and ways that they fast. Interestingly, Laura, fasting with food comes up a lot in Christianity. I didn't realize that a lot of sort of the Christian idea of fasting is just eating less than you normally would. One definition that I came across a lot was you can have one smallish meal and then two other meals that together do not add up to the first meal. So, that's still an amount of food that can keep you going.
Right.
So that's often the Christian definition of fasting, is taking time out of your day or your year, really, to do this often in order to remember that bad things happened in the past and will happen again. And to atone for your various sins and get closer to God by spending that time that you would be eating, praying or reading scripture, etc. So in addition to the big Christian fast Lent, which is 40 days leading up to Easter, where sort of in the modern sense, a lot of people will give up things like alcohol or swearing or chocolate or stuff, right? Have you all ever done sort of Lenten fasts?
I have.
I don't even know what that is.
I have. Well, kinda. I thought about it. I didn't really.
Marissa, you haven't heard of people doing like 40 days of not video games right before Easter? Like Ash Wednesday to Easter is usually the period.
Oh, okay. I think I've heard it called something else from where I grew up. My mistake.
Maybe.
I like to use the phrase, I gave it up for Lent a lot, but it's usually things like heroin or listening to my parents.
Yeah, that's the way to do it, Lauren.
Yeah. So, as I was saying, in addition to the big one that most people know of Christianity is Lent, there is apparently also rules about fasting every Wednesday and Friday.
How should we honor the sacrifice of Jesus? Well, we could fast, we could starve ourselves. No, that's too easy.
Oh, yeah.
Friday one I was a little bit more aware of because, of course, that was a big reason for, and the fur trade in Canada, the beavers all got wiped out because they weren't considered land animals. They were fish that could be eaten on Fridays.
Yeah.
Have a nice beaver
Wednesday.
steak.
Yeah, delicious beaver steak. I mean, apparently they taste fishy.
I would imagine.
I hope
And
you can still
oily.
eat beaver tails, the pastry, on Fridays. That's very important.
No, that's enriched flour. It's off the limits.
So the Friday fasts are supposed to commemorate the fact that Jesus died on Good Friday, like every Friday.
Yeah.
Supposed to commemorate that, not just Good Friday. I didn't know that. The Wednesday fasts are supposed to commemorate the day that Judas did his betraying and stuff.
Which apostle are you?
Judas.
Judas.
So, where do I go for my fitting?
Oh, I think you know where you're going, pal.
Oh.
Why we need to remember that every freaking week, I don't know, but apparently that's supposed to be the deal.
If you aren't finding ways to feel guilty, you're doing the religion wrong.
Yeah, try harder.
Growing up, so my family was Lutheran and I grew up Lutheran, but my grandmother was Ukrainian Catholic. And whenever we would go visit her, she would have like those calendars that the local pharmacy would print off or whatever, right? That kind of calendar. And every Friday had a little fish symbol on it
Aw.
to remind you to eat fish on Fridays.
Things get into the culture that way, hey?
Yeah.
Another denomination that I didn't realize was super into fasting are the Mormons. I knew about them like stockpiling food and not doing caffeine, but apparently once a month, a lot of Mormons have a fasting day where from Saturday night to Sunday night, so they'll eat dinner on Saturday and they will then eat dinner again on Sunday, but they won't eat anything in between that. And they are supposed to fast and pray and yada yada, but also to donate the amount of money that they would have spent on those meals that's supposed to go to help the poor. Of course, we know nothing that the Mormons do ever actually helps anyone, as far as I'm concerned. But that's
Harsh. Okay, I didn't know about that one. Very interesting.
yeah, and so they're encouraged to be even more generous if they can, to donate more than the cost of the meal. But once a month, most Mormons will do a little mini fast. Didn't know that. Very cool. Moving into Judaism, there's a couple of really big deal fast days in Judaism. Yom Kippur, big deal. Day of Atonement. You're supposed to fast for 25 hours. And during that time, just like think about, just be the, as you were saying, Laura, think about all of the guilty thoughts that you've had all year, everything you felt bad about, and try and do better next year, I guess, is the deal. The other huge feast, or sorry, opposite of feast, fast day in Judaism is, and apologies if I get this, Tisha B'Av. It is the 9th of the month of Av, and it is a commemoration of a lot of disasters, as are most of the Jewish holidays. They tried to murder us, let's eat. But they are commemorating in here the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem.
When in the year does that tend to fall?
So Yom Kippur, I remember, is always in like September-ish because we got a day off genetics class. Tisha B'Av is, when is it this year? August.
Okay.
It's like it tends to fall summer.
Okay. Interesting. And is that one as long of a fast as the Yom Kippur?
Yeah, it is
fast?
also 25 hours. It's like a sunset to sunset situation.
Right. That makes sense. It kind of, that follows the pattern.
Yeah. I think that the ends of fasts are interesting too. Like on Ramadan, you have the breaking of fast with dates and water. And here with this celebration or fast it is customary to sort of continue your fast for as long as you can afterwards, and at least until middle of the next day if you can.
So it's really like a 36-hour situation.
Right.
Okay.
And again, all of these are related to atonement, grief, mourning, thinking about how you can contribute better to the world around you instead of thinking about your own needs is kind of the idea. The Baha'i religion has a very interesting 19-day fast, which comes once a year and I think tends to fall around April. And they, again, are using this time to atone, to think about the world around them instead of themselves, not eating anything, no food, no water, very strict, unlike the Christian idea of fasting.
Mm.
But I assume this is only like sun up to sundown or something?
Yes, sun up to sundown.
Yeah, okay.
19 days with absolutely nothing.
You can't go that long with
Yeah.
No food, maybe. No water, definitely not.
no food, wouldn't recommend.
Yeah.
Now, all of these different religions have, I would say, a lot of rules and regulations and things, but nothing comes close to the sort of culture of fasting in Islam. Of course, there's the famous month-long sun-up to sundown fast of Ramadan. Learn some cool facts about how you observe Ramadan in places where the days are weird today. For example, in Svalbard, where you can get 24-hour day or 24-hour night, you only have to fast because of a thing in the Quran that says that you must begin fasting when you can tell a white thread from a black thread standing outside. That's the test.
Okay.
And so if night does not fall within one 24-hour period, technically something or other, like they haven't started a new day, so they don't have to do the fast.
Okay.
So Muslim folks on Svalbard and other places in the Arctic Circle will often, they get special permission to do the fast during the autumnal or spring equinoxes, where things are a
Okay.
bit more equal.
So they move their month in a way.
Yeah, they move the
That's-
fasting to some time where it makes sense. And
Oh,
it's also
interesting.
permissible for people who are, for example, menstruating. For the days that you are menstruating, women are encouraged to not fast and instead do those fasting days at some point between now and next Ramadan. So it's just, you got to make it up at some point.
That's very surprising to me,
right?
Considering that it's also very strict. Like, you need to know anywhere you are on the planet, you need to know where Mecca is, right? And
the minute
also
of sunset.
Yeah, and also just the communal aspect of sharing that same time period with people, and especially when you're thinking global religions and different cultures, or people who were from one place and are now another, like that community connection piece, that it would be just celebrated, let's say 2 months later or something like that, or 2 months earlier maybe. Like, it's very interesting that it wouldn't just be like, well, 12 hours and do it then.
Yeah, I had heard, maybe this was just the practice of some Muslims I know, like personally, but I had heard that in northern Canada, where it's either very long or very short, depending, you can observe the sun up, sundown in like a different part of the world.
So you pick Mecca or somewhere that has like a reasonable closeness to the equator. Equator.
Well, I was even thinking, like, I'm thinking of like there's that whole documentary and a lot of information almost 20 years ago now about like the first mosque in Iqaluit and getting it up there and all of that stuff. And I'm like, well, they're on like the same time zone as us here in Winnipeg, aren't they? So you could just pick like Winnipeg's sun up, sundown or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly how it was,
but it's interesting.
how they did it, but...
And I'm going to imagine too that it's probably like community dependent to some degree as well, of how the traditions they've chosen, how they decide to observe things. Very interesting.
I also learned that there are days in Islam where it is forbidden to fast. It is largely encouraged, like if you just feel like you need some spiritual guidance or whatever, try a fast. But there's a few days where you cannot do that. Eid, there was a commandment that you shall not fast that day. You have to celebrate and eat and do all of the good things. Both of the Eids and 3 days following Eid al-Adha, because Muhammad said, you are not to fast these days. They are days of eating and drinking and remembering. It is also not allowed for you to just choose to fast every Friday, because it was supposed to be Friday was supposed to be sort of a celebratory day. And so if you pick every Friday to fast, that is going against what Muhammad said to do. It is also not encouraged, or I don't know, I guess not allowed, to fast every day, because it is considered like if you do it every day, then it will mean nothing to you. So like, I can understand.
Also, you'll die.
I mean, yes, but again, it is like sun up to sundown. Still not a great idea. But I am interested to know, there is a little bit of research on like the effects of Ramadan specifically on things like workplace productivity, which dips like 35 to 50% apparently. And also people's moods and hormones will do a pretty big change, especially because like if you're doing sun up to sundown, you have to change your sleep pattern a lot to get up early and stay up late. Especially when it's in the summer, brutal.
Yeah.
So how does intermittent fasting like that affect our body? Let's find out in another segment later on.
All right. Thank you, Ashlyn. That was a fun rundown and some interesting information that I hadn't thought about before. So, Lauren, you have some special kinds of fasts to tell us about, don't you?
I mean, it's fasting as it affects a portion of the population that we don't really think of when we talk about fasting. I mean, a lot of the religious fasting, yes, but when we talk about fasting for weight loss or the like, we're mostly thinking about, well, let's put it this way, cis women, right?
Often.
Yeah, we don't really think about cis men. The culture does all the time, and they have become like the fastest growing diet industry is intermittent fasting and all things related to it, as it is marketed towards cis men. That's what I'm going to talk about today.
Awesome. Let's hear it.
All right. Fuck gender. F constructs, F stereotypes, F all the harm that has been done, is being done, and will be done in sacrifice to the entire concept of gender. That felt good. I think I might start all my segments with that sentence going forward. But as I said before, today I'm here to stick up for cis men.
It's about time somebody did.
Yeah, I know.
I was going to say like words you never thought you'd have to say, right, Lauren?
I actually have in my script, pause here for Jem to say something.
Like the two of you. Oh my God.
As someone who has done almost 400 episodes of a show called The Cis Are Getting Out of Hand, I definitely agree that we're not talking about men at any point over those 400 episodes.
Yeah. How could you? I mean, like, it's not like they put themselves out there at all, Marissa.
True, they're very subtle.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, Newman.
So, sidebar. The amount of pro-fasting infotainment articles that I read today that said gender throughout, where it meant biological differences in sex, and didn't account for the part that hormones play in metabolism and fat distribution. These articles were both appalling and, of course, extremely expected.
Oh, there's a big surprise! That's an incredible... I think I'm gonna have a heart attack and die from that surprise!
So, if you're going online, expect most of the surface level pieces in promotion to be written as if every man is cis, white, able-bodied, and young with perfectly balanced body chemistry. Nobody else need apply. I found one study. Well, it was a literature review on studies talking about nutrition, saying there have been very small studies on nutrition needs for people undergoing hormone treatments, but they're small in scale and they're not replicated in larger research, because why would anybody do any sort of research into that? They say they recommend talking with your healthcare team about proper nutrition. And I laughed and I laughed and I laughed.
as someone who works professionally in nutrition, it is an area that's lacking.
Mm-hmm. I went looking specifically, and that was basically what I found. Sorry. Today it makes me very, very angry. But going back to our surface level pieces, where every man is cis, white, able-bodied, and young, it's not really a sidebar. Upon a review of my segment, that's the big part of my thesis statement. We're all aware of the perfect and mostly unattainable image that diet industries push on women, and the one for men is similar, but it is presented very differently.
You'll feel like a fighter jet made of biceps!
Fasting articles for men promote like the bodybuilder look. You've got like muscles and barbells and blogs with names like The Fit Father and Fasting Your Way to Their Best Body Ever. These articles, when you read them, promote eating clean foods in the windows where you do eat and advertise heavily for whey powders and macronutrient supplements. Oh, we go further in there.
I'm sure.
I found a marketing blog post with tips for companies that are hoping to sell weight loss programs to men. Tips include, quote, emphasize fitness and lifestyle because men are more likely to search fitness than weight loss and clean eating than diet. Marketing weight loss to men is a non-starter because, another quote, generally speaking, the weight loss industry is heavily saturated with fad diets that may or may not work.
Whoa. Okay,
so let's promote those to
here.
women. Yeah, let's promote them to
exactly.
the girls. But the men need the hard sciences, right?
Oh my god.
Diet's
This is-
gay.
I want to do a whole segment just discussed, like, this marketing post is like 20 paragraphs long, and I think I could do a whole segment on it, but I had to pull myself back to get back to my main statement. It is the most cynical thing that I've read today. And to put that into perspective, we are recording this on February 1, 2025. And this is the most cynical thing I read today.
Well, the rest is just laugh till you cry situation. So
Yeah, not at the laughing part yet. So these different attitudes towards how fasting and dieting are marketed to men and women, they of course have created different problems. When it comes to disordered eating, women are more likely to report that they have developed anorexia and bulimia, while men are about 7% more likely to develop orthorexia. Is everybody familiar with orthorexia?
Haven't heard that one.
Okay. It's not
define
yet
it for us.
Yeah, it's not yet in the DSM, so it's still a proposed disordered eating. Orthorexia nervosa is the disorder where people are obsessed with eating clean food. You're maximizing your protein and other dense nutrients and minimizing carbohydrates and fillers. Folks with orthorexic tendencies also track exercise and calorie burning to an extremely unhealthy level. And if that sounds familiar to you, it sounds very similar to me to the online tracking apps that, especially ones that are specific for intermittent fasting programs. I know that when I was using an app, and I've used several, we're not all perfect, and I've been steeped in diet culture since the 80s. When I was using an app to track calories in and calories out, I slid extremely quickly into orthorexic behaviors. A couple of studies have shown that individuals with intense orthorexia generally will lord their healthy eating habits over others, and that is the driving force behind their orthorexia, as opposed to body image like anorexia. So,
Yeah.
what I look awful, it's I need to look better than you, so I can be a bigger man than you.
Now with preposterous amounts of testosterone. Preposterone!
With the orthorexia too, it becomes an obsession with certain types of foods and the healthiness of them as well. And so that it's a subtle difference from some of the other eating disorders, but it is like the specifics of the foods themselves. And so people who have orthorexia or would fit sort of that categorization, they may actually be getting enough nutrition, but their rigidity and the fear and the obsession over remaining within that is what characterizes it.
Yeah.
So just for the non-Greek speakers among us, the prefix ortho just means right or like correct. Orthorexia would be like the correct way to eat.
Yeah. In nutrition school, like that kind of stuff came up because at least the way that I was taught nutrition, there were definitely like healthy foods and unhealthy foods. And also, I definitely grew up in diet culture and had disordered eating tendencies, but didn't go further than that. But nutrition school certainly reinforced that kind of thing. And you start getting worried when you're learning all about all the dangers of saturated fat. It's easy to start getting worried about that cream that you're putting in your coffee and start thinking, well, maybe I should only do milk. Maybe I shouldn't do any at all.
Just like how a microbiologist becomes a germaphobe real quick. But yeah, I find, in addition to my anorexic behaviors, it slips into orthorexic behaviors and it does the same. And I know I'm not a dude, but I'm not much of anything. So I see this with a lot of people. You can see this behavior in real time, actually, in some of the, guess where we're going, the online men's rights activists and their followers in the manosphere.
Ugh, gross.
You see an emphasis with people like Rogan. Ugh. How did such a good show give us both Joe Rogan and Andy Dick? Jen? Oh, I swear news radio is worth it, but not for those two. Rogan's a big proponent of this stuff. You see an emphasis in the people they like to talk to are the ideal is the Ubermensch. That's your rip muscles and the dehydration to show their definition. And everybody sells the snake oil products meant to add to your sick gains. You've got your protein powders, you've got your whey powders, you've got, I don't know.
Don't forget your pre-workouts.
Oh, yeah, you gotta have your pre-workout and your post-workout shakes, but you know, but they can't be soy because soy makes you a girl. We have an entire generation of young men that are growing up with this being their ideal male body image. And yeah, we've always had things like the Charles Atlas and blah, 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 but this is much more directed at them. One of the articles I read for my research was summarized on healthline.com. So it sounds like a place where you would go to get health information, right? Like it the top links. And I used both Google and other searches because I like to see what other people are getting when they go and looking. And I was using my Chrome browser, and I couldn't be bothered to fight them because I wanted to see what other people were seeing. When the splash screen came up to say that I used my ad blocker, I clicked it away so I could see the ads. In an article that was entitled Intermittent Fasting Linked to Disordered Eating, Other Dangerous Behaviors, there were 7 ads on the page. How many do you think were for Noom, an intermittent fasting app?
Oh, at least 3.
Right on the money, Laura. 3 of the 7 ads were for Noom. And not just like one that followed you down the page. They were at different spots in the page.
You can't escape that company.
Yeah. Oh. And
that's
there was
programmatic ad placement, baby.
Yep. And one of the others on the page was for all-you-can-eat Pizza Hut.
I love how they are just like only extremes, nothing in like a normal variation of human behavior.
No, that's like you used to look at the old like Women's World magazines, or I mean the websites now too. You've got, shed 40 pounds in 10 days, and right beside the feed your family because you don't love them enough if you don't feed them a turkey dinner every night.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So the men are getting it too.
I mean, like, I guess this is what they keep saying about like women wanting equality, right?
This is not the right way to get it. We get that by overthrowing capitalism.
I know. Like, oh my God. No, go on, Lauren, go on.
I'm
almost say, hearing what I do and who it's associated with for my following segment, this is not going to be a great endorsement for my behavior.
Marissa, I'll let you know. No, I've done my share of intermittent fasting too, both intentionally and unintentionally. And Ashlyn I'm giving you permission to pipe up and let people know how many times you have to ask me if I've eaten, because it's just how my body works now, or it doesn't work now. I've done fasting. We're all on different journeys, and I'm excited to hear about your journey. But for going back to the idea of these online media, which healthline.com, it pushes itself as a health site, and it's perpetuating disordered eating, but it feels especially scummy on a link, and with healthline.com, that might be something you find as an online search for help, because it came up in a search before I got to the NEDIC, which is the National Eating Disorder Information Center, when I searched for orthorexia and intermittent fasting. So that's what people are getting out there. Which goes back to the thesis that Jem and I throw out here every couple of months. The internet was a mistake.
I don't know if you did this at all, Lauren, but if you were to look at a classic intermittent fasting informed diet weight loss plan, and one of these ones that is targeted at men, like you highlighted a couple of the differences, but are there any other differences that you noticed?
You've got things, I mean, I know the Noom app was advertised on this healthline.com, but for sites that were specifically geared towards men, you'd see other apps, and I can't remember the titles of them right now because I don't have the pages right in front of me. But
was it like manlybods.com or something like that?
Something like that, yeah. Like get ripped or use our product to be all your sick gains tracked here, dudes, or whatever. You may not like it, but this is what peak performance looks like. It's the best app. I don't know. I can't do the meme from the top of my head. Yeah.
And that
There
like
is a
that
difference.
So, and that peak performance piece that you just mentioned, like that's a really big part of the targeting for men. Like that's not something that like traditional diets for women will talk about. Like women's diets are never about actually functioning in the world or being stronger or smarter. I mean, they're not about women at all, but like they're not about you're not going to get anything except a smaller body. That is it. Yeah. That's all they promise. But it's interesting that the men's ones, the marketing of the repackaging is like peak performance. Like you're doing this to perform your best, to be the smartest, to be the strongest, or whatever, right? Whatever
you're
manly
giving your body
things.
a tune-up. You're giving your body a tune-up. You're fixing problems. You're using your smarts and your science. They really push the, hey, let's get into the science of this more than the, go sit down, honey, and nothing tastes as good as thin feels. You never see that on the stuff that's marketed.
Like the men's things in general are like peak manosphere is what, like rising above your humanity, essentially. Yeah. Like, right? So like only weak men need to eat.
Yeah, I'm repeating myself here. It's going like everything old is new again. It's the Ubermensch thing.
Yeah. So it's just interesting how all of it is, and this is like we're talking about like these fasting because this is a very popular type of weight loss plan right now, right? It could be any other thing, right? Especially for men. And probably for men too, because it's relatively new and it doesn't carry like the low fat SnackWell's type baggage that those kinds of diets do.
That marketing blog that I read, that really cynical thing says, avoid using terms like weight because people will think of Weight Watchers and Jenny Craig, and you're not going to get men that way.
Yeah, exactly. But all of it is still associating like food with guilt.
Yeah, like they eat plain white chicken breast without seasoning because salt is evil.
I'll have the worst day of my life with a side order of guilt, please.
Yeah, like you could
maybe a piece of broccoli on the side. That's like, no.
But so this is
flavor.
No, because real men don't need flavor. You just think of like your manly muscles, and that's all the pleasure you need. That's my man voice.
It's very good.
Salt goes right to your pectoral muscles.
Well, then you might retain water, and then you can't see those sick veins.
Yeah. That's why every bodybuilder is dehydrated. To a bad point. Anyway, I've sort of petered off my topic here, but yeah, intermittent fasting and the diet industry has been repackaged for a more alt-right, fit in or die, must be this kind of man or you're not really a man. Ashlyn told me I only got 2 F-bombs in this segment, and I made it, because here's the second one. Fuck gender.
Yeah, I have to ask because I was someone who was on the other side of something like this. when they say you're not a real man, do they mean it? Because I got told I wasn't a man for a long time, and they only got pissed off about it when I agreed with them. Just saying.
I know. I had somebody say to me, "You'll never be a real woman," and I said, "Thank you so much."
You're like, finally. Oh God. Yeah, no, I think it doesn't matter what they don't care about the answer. They just want to say that. They just want to draw lines to pretend like this little fake wall is going to protect them and their massive insecurities.
Hi, babe. Yes, I am real man. You want to go skateboards?
But next time we want to do something about nutrition and marketing of this kind of thing, remind me so I can dissect that blog post line by line.
Oh, anytime, Lauren. It
will be in the show notes.
Fantastic. I
listen to me with the 2 F-bombs, to be clear.
Pardon me?
To be clear, I didn't think you were going to listen to me when you said how many F-bombs can I have, and I said 2. I thought I was setting a minimum.
No, I want to keep our non-E rating whenever possible, but I don't think I'm going to be the cause of it today.
Oh man, that was really, I really enjoyed that segment, Lauren. Thanks for bringing it up and bringing up again the ways that this capitalist industry and finds ways to make everyone miserable, even the people who think that they are ruling the system.
Yeah, well, it was an untapped market, Laura.
Yeah, you can't leave any of those. All right. Well, Marissa.
Yes.
I would love to hear from you about your experiences doing intermittent fasting and that. And so before we jump into that, as I had said in our chat, like I am a person who really can't go more than about 5 hours without eating something while I'm awake. I don't wake up to eat at night or anything, but I am one of those people that like my body is talking to me and I cannot function anymore and my world revolves around food, and I get very frustrated when those around me also don't structure their days that way because I assume that everybody functions like me. So the idea of willingly like restricting my eating to a very small window every single day when I don't absolutely have to is just the most foreign concept for me. Like I talk to people all the time who do it, but it's just like wild. So I'm very interested in hearing about people who do that.
Well, it doesn't exactly start out in the most healthy of places. However, when you are a long distance hiker like I am, it often involves being not in a place with people who might not want to hurt me, shall we say. And when I do that, I'm often given the internal choice of not eat or go into place where my purple hair might offend somebody talked about in the previous segment. So, starting up with that, part of the reason I learned to go for a long time was because if I don't, I have to deal with them.
That's fair. That's an understandable situation then.
But the other reason that I started doing it, as for a little bit of context, I am someone who has lived under both binary genders, and I can say the hormonal differences are very considerable. But I have also, yes, I have been a professional athlete under both hormone levels, shall we say. They have very different effects.
Okay.
But that is also to say that I am not an inactive person. I have been a professional football player for 6 years, and I am a long-distance hiker. However, even with more level of activity than I would say most people have, I was not losing any weight. And I don't mean to use that in I have this arbitrary number I need to meet. It was more in a body dysmorphic kind of sense that there were a couple areas of my body that did not match the rest, and that gave me issues internally. So when I talk about myself, I am not talking about anybody else's body or how I perceive anyone's body. It's the voice in my head that tells me I look like a penguin. So I don't want far too often things I say about genders, bodies, or anything, they're often met with responses of, oh, but I have this that makes me feel bad. So for the total record, I am speaking for nobody but myself.
I really appreciate that preface. That is,
Yeah.
and I think that's a good rule for most of us when we talk about our relationships to food and bodies and so on.
To be fair, I was not thinking of your situation in any way that was detrimental or in any way that it impacted on my situation. I just finding it very interesting how they, I don't want to say mirrored, but had a conversation with each other. So
certainly, and I'm not speaking to anybody directly on this podcast, so just so that's there.
Yeah,
but
I know we're all coming at it from a good place.
I have just been met with a series of contradictory criticism for anything, including going through my own gender confirmation surgery, at which point the trans community attacked me for both reasons, where I got surgery, so I conformed with the cis, and therefore I shouldn't talk about it. But also, I shouldn't talk about it because it might make people who can't get it feel bad. So there is literally nothing I can do that isn't met with, but why did you do that? Point being, yes. So, like I said, I played professional football. This is my 6th season. But what I do even more often is long distance hiking. And just to put data on that, last year I hiked over 1,000 miles and I didn't start keeping track on a hiking app until April. So I'm not inactive.
That's a lot of distance.
Yes. The longest I've hiked in a day is 22 miles, and that was without stopping.
Oh my God.
So if you put those kind of data points in, you would think that I would be able to achieve some mythical fitness, body correlation, happiness place. But I was not. In every other part of my body would be what you would think of for somebody who hikes that much and plays football. But the lower strip of my stomach stuck out, and it made me, only me, feel like a penguin, and especially in a sport where I have to wear a skin-tight jersey, and nobody else ever made me feel this way. My own head did. Mm-hmm. So when I spoke with my sports doctor, this person suggested intermittent fasting, and also to spread out my hormone intake because my hormones come in a bottle, so I don't have to worry about them wearing out. And what I did was align my fasting with when I took my hormones as well, so that I would only have to remember one time of day instead of 2. It has worked for me.
Okay.
And I'm not saying it would for anybody else, and the number of names it was associated with in the previous segment make me question all of my life choices, but it has worked pretty well for me in the particular goals that I had.
That's my goal in life, is to get everybody to question every single life choice they've ever made.
Oh.
Love you, mean it.
Okay, so I'm curious, Marissa, if you're okay to talk about it, and if you're not, that's fine. But I'm just curious how you noticed. Did you notice like appetite changes or differences as you changed around this timing, or anything that helped or made it different? I'm just curious.
I found it to be much more mental than physical.
Okay.
In the sense of, if I could put myself in the mind frame of not wanting to eat for more reasons than I'm hungry or it's been a certain amount of time, I stopped getting hungry before the period of time that I was able to eat. And sometimes I would go, for the record, it's 2 p.m. 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. is when I eat. But also keep in mind that some of these days I'm starting to hike at 6 or 7 a.m.
Yeah, so you're an early riser.
Yes, because there aren't people out on the hiking trails at these times, therefore. But also considering that I live in Minnesota, which is Little Canada and really needs to pick up the slack on that because I don't exist according to my own federal government. Whee! It's fun. I'm powerful. But getting out on the trail when nobody else is out there is worth the advantage to me. But especially if I want to hike on the north shore of Minnesota on Lake Superior, I really need to get out there early before everybody else shows up, even if it's negative 30 degrees. But that also involves 3 to 4 hours of driving each direction. And some of those times I would do 2 or 3 hikes and still not eat, which may have put me in the 4 to 5, even 6 o'clock range sometimes. And most of the time, surprisingly, that hasn't been a problem. But one of the biggest reasons I decided to do this was because structuring diet in a way has backfired on me in 2 different ways. One was someone talked me into the slow carb diet once upon a time, and that screwed up my metabolism so bad that I haven't recovered from it. But also, I eat like a 10-year-old because I have food allergies, and they seem to keep mounting and growing as I get older, which thanks, Mom. So the idea of reducing intake by number of times and when I eat was easier for me than trying to structure some kind of healthier, quote unquote, diet, because my pattern of eating in general is I go to a place, if I find one thing that I like and doesn't make me feel awful / send me to the hospital, I am going to eat that thing every time I go there.
Right. That makes sense. Okay. I really appreciate that perspective, that thinking about like there's so many different ways to consider one's diet, one's patterns when it comes to eating, and thinking about like realistically this, given the other constraints in your diet life, that made the most sense for you.
I have found it to be like any other kind of fitness ritual, in the sense of once I get used to it and get in a pattern, it's easier to do. And that was the other part of what I meant by it's just as much mental, is if I do it every day and I do it in a structured way, maybe it's just because I'm autistic, but it's easier because that's what I do every day, and breaking my rituals and my routines is difficult on me. So it might just be out of wanting to keep the hamsters in the brain happy as much as anything.
I was going to ask if that's your tendency towards the consistency piece of things.
Yes, if there is something that I can document and something that I can keep in a routine, it tends to make me function better.
Okay. Kind of sounds like it is something that is just how you live your life.
Yes. I do not eat until 2 p.m. Very few exceptions. I have broken it, and unwillingly, to say the least. But since I have been doing this and continuing my physical regimen, I have noticed the difference in my lower stomach area that I wanted from doing the excessive amount of working out that I was doing, but was not seeing the results for. And this is without very much drop on the number scale, which surprises me, because if I compared the pictures, it would appear like I've lost weight, but I didn't lose very much numbers-wise, but my body looks more like I wanted it to. So that just demonstrates the case to me that it was never about the number. It was about feeling like my body made sense in my head.
I'm curious a little bit about your eating patterns. Like if things are different in the meals or the amount of food or something that you would eat on this regimen compared to before you were actively structuring your day this way, if you have any sense of that.
I would say that the biggest difference is that other than not eating breakfast, it's not much different at all. It's just I've removed that portion of it. And once 2 o'clock comes around, I'll probably eat something small that just breaks the fast. And then dinner is usually the one that's a full meal for me. And surprisingly, considering I don't eat as much as I used to, also during the bigger meals, I don't eat as much as I used to. And that is not a conscious choice, but I also don't feel as much hunger as I used to. So I don't know if that's connected or not, but I can't eat as much as I once did. And maybe portion control was a problem before I was putting in this particular implement. But I don't mind that because I don't find myself feeling bad or feeling tired. And hormones, once again, they come in a bottle. They won't change based on based on what I'm eating or not eating.
Okay.
I mean, not to the swing that somebody that a cis person's would.
Right.
They're still going to change a little bit. I'm sorry, I'm just being pedantic now.
It's the one real advantage that trans athletes have. Our hormones come in a bottle. We don't have to worry about how those particular things affect us. That's why we need to be banned.
You say it's pedantic there, Lauren, but I think it is a useful thing to consider, right? That these things these things do play a role, right? Even these little things, right? But at the same time, it's going to be, I'm going to imagine it's still going to be different person to person and all of that. Okay. So bodies
are weird.
Yeah, bodies are weird. It's so weird, right, Jem?
Amen.
Sorry, did you want to say something, hon?
No, I was just thinking about when the senior resident spilled somebody's pleural fluid on me the other day.
That's gross.
Bodies are weird.
Is there anything that we didn't cover or that you wanted to share or maybe bring to the panel or anything, Marissa, from sharing your experience with this?
Well, like I said, I was coming from it of the perspective of not knowing this was the societal reputation around intermittent fasting. I'm kind of glad I avoided that, or I probably never would have done it.
Okay, so now that you know, how are you doing with that?
I'm definitely not going to be bragging about it in certain places. But it works for me right now, and I definitely want to beat my hiking totals from last year, and I don't see my food intake behaviors changing anytime soon because I feel like I want to, whereas before I felt like I didn't match according to my own head. So since this has gotten me where I want to be, I will continue with it until and unless I am given a reason not to.
Fair enough. In any case, thank you. Thanks for sharing that, Marissa. I'm a little bit astounded that you did not know that, or that you weren't aware of the reputations of some of these things out there. But then at the same time, I also live in a world that I can't go a day without hearing about it. So
well, you
I'm
see,
a little skewed.
What I have done for my body is get into routines. What I've done for my mind is also get into routines, most of which have been not having social media for the last 2 years.
Is extremely healthy.
Yes.
I would not have any idea what Joe Rogan thought about anything if I didn't have social media, and I would probably be happier for it.
I am very much happier for not knowing what's going on for the most part. When you are a targeted demographic to the extent that I am, we know what they want. I don't need to know the specifics. But let's just say I've had my passport ready for some time just in case, and that just in case may be sooner than later.
Oh, good times. Good times. Ashlyn, you'd mentioned that you had unintentionally done intermittent fasting.
Oh yeah, I'm just bad at feeding myself.
Okay.
Most of my problem is just especially with having this new job, I frequently leave the house without eating anything, and theoretically I could eat at work. I could eat anything I want at work. I could eat my own food. I could eat other people's food. I could eat any of the millions of snacks that's downstairs. But I just get busy and don't think about putting food in my face until I get home at 6:30. So
listeners, I do try to put food in Ashlyn before they leave the house in the morning, I swear.
Yes, they try really hard. They just sometimes do not succeed. But yeah, it has been an issue ongoing that just executive dysfunction means sometimes intermittent fasting happens by accident.
So this is not yet a lifestyle choice, like an active choice on your...
No, it's something that I'm trying to avoid. I have gotten the little special chocolate milks and whatnot to try and put protein in me before I go, because I know like my meds work better too if I have protein in me before I start, but it's hard to get in the routine.
Okay. Thanks for sharing that. Again, I cannot fathom that situation. Like I as someone who did work in the food industry for many years in university and that, when you work in that industry, you don't always get the opportunity to eat at eating time because you're busy getting other people their food. And I was that person who would eat like half of a supper at 4 p.m. right before I would go for my shift, be starving throughout the shift, sometimes cram a granola bar in during the shift in like a 30-second break that I might get. And then after, eat a full supper, because missing that meal was like, my body is just like, no, we eat a full meal at this time. You did not follow that. Come back and do it. So anyway.
And like, as we've discussed, often your brain starts getting fixated on those thoughts of food, and just it goes over and over, and you end up needing more than you would have otherwise.
Yeah. Well, and physiologically, it's not just a mental thing, it is a physiological thing. And this is something that for some people is a much stronger thing than others. But physiologically, once your like your hunger hormones are starting to grow to a certain extent, and if you have a drop in blood glucose at the same time, you do overeat. Like, it becomes a physiological response to it. You eat as much as you can, your preference for foods changes, and so it's not just a like, oh man, it's been 8 hours since I ate, I really want like burger and fries, the biggest I can get. It's that your brain is going, I need the most calories I can get, the fastest I can get them. And so that food actually does look more appealing. You want it more, you want to eat all of it more. Like, it is not a conscious choice, at least part of it.
Yeah. And for me, like, I have to force my body to eat.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like a forgetful thing. And I know, Ashlyn, you've got some things that make your body not want food. But yeah, I have just messed with my metabolism enough that food is either give it all to me or get it away from me. And I'm trying to get better about that. And my partners are very patient with me in helping. So I appreciate that.
That's a tricky situation. And you're certainly not alone in that, Lauren.
Oh no, it's pretty standard.
that cognitive piece of things, or becoming disconnected from those cues, becoming disconnected, or sometimes for some people it gets a little bit rewired even. So hunger ends up feeling more like anxiety and fear.
I got those in spades.
Right? So I'm not putting any names on anything for anybody here again. And some people are genetically more predisposed to that as well, which is part of the reason why maybe it was a little bit easier to ignore them in the first place for some of us, right?
Well, like I said to you, Marissa, with how our situations sort of talk to each other, you kind of went into sort of a fasting lifestyle without looking at it. But me, who was so steeped in this diet culture, I knew what I was getting into when I started doing it to my body. So there was a whole other mental and emotional, and this is getting way too personal right now, but it's something that has occurred to me that I'm now just going to have to talk about with my therapist. I'll take that to her and not to you all.
I'll also add that I come from a perspective of I never liked food really to begin with, in the sense of people would ask why I wasn't interested in cooking or watching cooking shows or any other aspect of that. And it was because even before I was in this kind of structured diet, I didn't like food. Like, if I didn't have to eat, I wouldn't. So I was coming from that. And that might be because food has sent me to the hospital on multiple occasions.
Yeah. I think you both bring up really important points, that you can have an eating pattern that in and of itself is an eating pattern. What we bring to it emotionally, cognitively, genetically, all these things is what affects it, right? And then the discourse, the societal discourse around why we do that, why we don't do that, is it a valued eating pattern? Is it not, right? So there are people, like a lot of people have always been like, never eaten breakfast, like a solid lunch, a solid supper, and that's their routine kind of thing. They fall in intermittent fasting, but I'm thinking of like my older male relatives that might be like that they would never call themselves that ever. It's not the perspective they take. They're like, that's just what they do, right? And they exist in a time and space and context sort of outside of a lot of the discourse that happens now around it. So it's very interesting to think about all of these different things. Okay. Thank you both for sharing. I really appreciate that. And again, it never fails. You can't talk about food without talking about feelings. So when people ask me why I'm going to school to be a therapist now, that is one of my answers. So to follow up on that, we've been talking a lot about intermittent fasting and fasting in general. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what happens when you fast. Why all the hullabaloo about this process of not eating to begin with. So I'm going to talk a little bit about just fasting in general, like what happens when you're not putting food in your body. And then I'll talk a bit about intermittent fasting, and I'm going to talk about it from more of an academic perspective, a larger picture. This is a huge topic. And as I was saying to Jem, there is so much study, so much research out there on this because it has been the it diet for a good decade now. And it was frankly more than I wanted to do because I have to do a lot of research for my schoolwork and I didn't want to do all the research for this too. So it's going to be a little bit more of a gloss over kind of thing, but I'm happy to talk about these different things. And again, when I talk about it, it's not going to be a criticism or a direction for anybody. It's going to be more so this is what we've researched with this. Take from that what you will. So after that very long preamble, what happens when you fast? Jem, you haven't talked much. Like, are you okay?
I'm trying to make up for all of the talking that I did last episode.
Well, since you're the doctor around here, I can talk about what happens when you fast, but do you want to talk about it at all on the spot?
Sir, excuse me, sir. I'm sorry I have to wake you. You a doctor?
That's right.
So there's lots of complex interactions, and as Laura is fond of telling me, doctors are not the experts on food and metabolism, although some endocrinologists, I guess, would disagree on that last part.
Metabolism, yes. Food, no.
Yeah. My mind just flashed to the Krebs cycle diagram. No, I'm not going there. But basically, we have blood sugar, and like glucose is the main nutrient that we use for fuel in our body. All of our cells use it. And we have insulin that allows the glucose to go from our bloodstream into the cells and feed them. And when you don't have enough glucose in your bloodstream to feed all your cells, there are a couple of processes that get kickstarted in your body. You can break down stored glycogen.
I know some of these words.
Which is like the human version of starch in your muscles and in your liver and that. It's carbohydrates.
Yeah. So your muscles will store glycogen to use locally, and your liver will store sugar as glycogen, like to use systemically, like throughout your whole body. There's also other processes that get kickstarted that break down proteins in your body and lipids,
which are fats.
like fats, in order to make usable alternative fuels. And some of those are ketone bodies. 2 of the 3 of which are actually ketones chemically.
And you're talking on this because I completely took an entire section on ketosis out of my segments.
So basically the brain, from what I recall, pretty much requires glucose. But much of the body can function on ketones for at least a short period of time, although it does acidify your blood and cause some issues. But when you're fasting, your body basically flips over from one type of metabolism, in a sense, to another, and it will preferentially burn certain body tissues to fuel that process.
Thanks, Dr. Jem.
Oh boy, I didn't expect to be put on the spot like that.
I mostly wanted to get you involved in the conversation.
Remind people, including me, that I'm here.
Yes, exactly. But you did a great job.
When you become a media Dr. Jem, do you prefer Dr. Jem or Dr. Newman?
No. Lauren. It's Doc G. Doc G.
Oh,
We're
Doc
making
G.
it happen. Doc G. He hates it.
I hate it so much. This is another conversation that I've had multiple times with Laura, because I always said, like, I do not want to be one of those doctors that insists on being called Dr. Newman. I find that extremely obnoxious. However, whenever I introduce myself as Jem, it starts this whole conversation with like, Jim? Jem? Jen? Sorry, did you say Jen? You can just call me Dr. Newman, it's fine.
Jem, you did an excellent job. Your brain is so full of information all the time. I don't know how you remember these kinds of things. So, very impressed. Yeah, the long and the short of it, or the short of it is, the body runs on glucose. Why does it run on glucose? Because we evolved in environments where glucose became readily available, and it's relatively quick to metabolize and gives us a pretty good output. So we do that.
We had lots of fruit.
With fruit and vegetables and grains, and like all of your plants have glucose in them. Even if you eat raw meat, you're going to get glucose from it. Fun fact, Inuit diets that are very high in animal products and very low in plant products, fair amount of carbohydrate in them. They're about 30 to 40% carbohydrate because they eat a lot of raw meat and they're getting the glycogen.
Yep, they're getting the glycogen.
Very cool. And that was a total diversion. So yeah, brain loves glucose. Brain pretty much only wants glucose. Oh, it can get by with a little bit of ketones, but
I'm sorry. I'm just imagining this person in like a ketotic state, eating a paleo diet, and their brain is just going, brain need glucose. Brain like glucose.
Well, that's like the stupor that happens when people do that.
We are not judging anybody, and this is like, it's a really important point. I mean, diets are extremely personal, and anything related to your medical decisions is extremely personal. And one of the things that, as doctors, we really should be trying harder, but really need to do is not judge people's choices, but just try to
understand where they're coming
from and present them with information and perspectives that we might find useful, and give them the tools that they need to make the best decision for themselves.
Absolutely. Yeah, with the diet, when you don't eat things, you don't have glucose coming in. You use up the glucose or the glycogen that's stored in your body within about 24 hours, or maybe less if you already had less stored. Then your body does shift to ketones, but first it starts trying to make its own glucose from protein. So it starts breaking down your muscles and your organs and anything made out of protein in a process called
gluconeogenesis.
I can say big words too, Newman. He was chomping at the bit like you wouldn't believe.
First of all, champing at the bit.
Shut up.
Second of all, I didn't use that word when you were asking me to describe it. Gluconeogenesis popped into my head, and I said, I'm not going to say that word because Laura will make fun of me for saying a big word, but I wanted you to know that I knew it.
You have tuned into Marital Problems Cast with Laura and Jem.
Now we've learned the root of like 50% of Jem's random interjections. Just wanted you to know that I knew it.
Yeah, because us being worried that you don't know a thing is a huge fear. Like a huge reality. Like, oh my God.
I mean, like, honestly, I'm the same.
Oh, I know. You're just
That's
more
why
pleasant about it.
You're so good at
Whoa.
Okay, can we talk about fasting, please?
Go for it.
Okay. Okay. So your body starts breaking down your own protein, and eventually it starts breaking down your fat to make ketones, which your brain can use. And most of your body tissues can use that. And then over time, a bunch of your body tissues become able to actually use just straight up fats. Like they don't need to turn it into ketones. They can just use the fatty acids. But this takes a few weeks time for this process to happen. So if you're fasting, if you're eating nothing, typically your blood sugar level will fall, as well as your insulin levels, which makes sense because there's less sugar coming in, right? And you don't need as much insulin to manage your glucose levels because there isn't as much glucose. Like these things tend to go hand in hand if you're eating nothing. If you're eating nothing, weight loss happens because the way that your body works is it burns as much as it needs and it tries to get you to eat as many calories or as much fuel as it needs to burn to sustain itself. That's more or less how metabolism functions. It aims for a steady state there. So if you suddenly go from needing X amount of calories or energy to 0 calories, your body has a deficit. And so as it will try to get that energy from its own stores, from fats and proteins and the glycogen and that, but it's not going to be able to get enough. So you're going to start losing body mass because of that. The other thing that will happen too is that you tend to lose a lot of weight at first, especially if you're not getting a lot of carbohydrates in your diet, because once the carbohydrates are gone, carbohydrates hold water with them, and so you lose a bunch of water weight in the first little bit as well too. So that's why no matter what way you go about eating less, if there's less carbs going in, you tend to see a bit dramatic change at the beginning, and then it tends to slow down. Okay? If you continue to eat nothing, and I'm talking about like full on fasting, like nothing, you get malnutrition because your body it can't break down enough. It can't make its own energy enough. We are not a closed system. We can't photosynthesize. We have to have energy coming in to keep our body functions going. There's no way that we can supply enough day in, day out. It just doesn't happen. The other thing is that you are going to get vitamin and mineral deficiencies because your body stores are going to get depleted. Some of these your body can reuse, but other ones they can't. And so you will start to have your body function won't be as good because you don't have this coming in. And then in that malnutrition, your body tissues, your organs, your bones, all of this are going to become damaged in this process because they don't have the energy and nutrients coming in to fix them. So your bones are going to become less dense over time. Your muscles are going to be smaller and they're going to be less efficient and less effective, and your organs aren't going to work as well. All of these things are going to happen with fasting.
Sounds bad.
Yeah. So not eating anything for long periods of time, and that process actually can start, the malnutrition process can start within a few days of not eating anything or eating just extremely small amounts of things, especially if you had been having precarious nutrition before that. So it starts pretty rapidly. Like we actually do need to eat regularly, like most days. We need to get some food in order to keep things going.
We just need to keep feeding these meat suits over and over again. It never ends.
We do. Like that is how they function. They just do. So as I was researching and just refreshing my memory on what happens during fasting, I came across a very interesting study from 1966 where they took 13 people and were trying to treat their quote unquote obesity. And I hate that word, but that's what the word that was used in the study, by starving them, by like strict no food, no calorie fast.
No.
Yeah, the old 0 calorie diet.
Yep.
Hey, why don't you not do that?
So they were allowed to have water and some coffee and tea and other like non-caloric flavored beverages. So whatever like Crystal Light was back in the 60s. And that's it. They had nothing. They had nothing. And they claimed that one person went 249 days on this diet.
No.
I think this was a bad study. I do not think it is ethical. It was a good study in that it pointed out some of the things that we don't understand well about the process of malnutrition and starvation. So this was a study in The Lancet.
Oh my God.
Run by doctors. And they were talking about how their blood potassium and electrolyte levels stayed normal through this whole prolonged fast. They do. That doesn't mean that their body stores of potassium and sodium and phosphorus and all these other things are actually adequate to keep a body functioning. It's that the body does everything it can to keep your blood levels of these minerals in its homeostatic range, because otherwise your heart stops beating.
Yeah.
And your brain stops braining. Like it has to.
Yeah, I'm just trying to imagine, well, mission accomplished. Time to start eating again. And that's when the...
Yes. This study did not talk about anything that happened after these fasts.
So just for the edification of our listeners and maybe the rest of the panel, your body is really good at, as Laura said, maintaining electrolyte balance in that starvation state, or like as good as a physical system can be when there is still output but no more input. However, there's this process called refeeding syndrome that can occur once a starving body starts eating again, in which things no longer maintain homeostasis and people can very rapidly die. It was first discovered in a study of people with certain eating disorders.
So I bring up this point because very often I get people who say to me, well, my doctor did blood work and all my levels are fine, which is exactly what this study said. And I said, that's not how you tell if you're malnourished. If your blood work is telling you that you're malnourished, you are very sick. Very, very sick. Okay? So I'm just saying, malnutrition from starvation happens quickly, but it's not going to show up in the ways you expect it to. A blood test isn't going to tell you that. Same thing like in this study, there were like people were walking around on the ward and I'm like, wow, how many of them got osteoporotic fractures during that time because they didn't get like a DEXA scan to see their bone density? So that's just a sidebar. I just wanted to tell you all about this terrible study that I can't believe was published and had all the same like fat phobic horrendous types of assumptions and language in there. And they were brushing off somebody who was having very clear, like, renal and fluid balance issues as, like, an outlier instead of being like, oh, hey, maybe we shouldn't starve people, like, actively starve people. But I digress.
100+ days.
Yeah.
How? That person had to be cheating.
It reminds me of the breatharians. You remember that, Ashlyn?
Exactly.
This was my first thought, right? And actually, when you read accounts of the illness, oh God, what's it called? It was the religious anorexia, anorexia something or other.
Religioso.
It's something like that, but like it was the thing that happened to young, very pious women in Europe. And it was before the late 1800s when they decided that anorexia nervosa was a thing. Anyway, they did have a few of those people who claimed to have eaten nothing for, like, absolutely nothing for 3 years. But then on very careful scrutiny, they were definitely hiding food in the bed that they were in 24 hours a day and such. So I wanted to give that physiology just as a background of like what happens when you don't eat. Okay? So intermittent fasting isn't meant to be like a full starvation, and I sure hope it's not for anybody. Like I always hope that everybody is getting whatever diet pattern they're following. I hope that they're getting all the nutrition that their body needs so that they can be as healthy as they can be, so that their body can work as best as it can, so that they don't suffer consequences that would make their lives really unpleasant, right? That's my job here. So intermittent fasting isn't about full starvation. It's trying to mimic some of those metabolic shifts that happen in those early days of the fasting. So it's trying to avoid the malnutrition, hopefully, but still get the metabolic changes and the weight loss that's happening there. Intermittent fasting is a pretty broad category and actually contains many different kinds of things. And so there's what we were talking about earlier, whereas that time-restricted eating, that's when you have an eating window. That's probably the one that most people are familiar with. And I'm going to, totally anecdotally, but I'm going to guess it is very, like, the most commonly tried one because you eat every day, you just change the time that you're eating, right? And that usually the windows can be anywhere between 4 hours and 12 hours, depending on the program that you're following. But most commonly it's around 8-ish, 8 to 10-ish hours. So that is time restricted eating. Then there are the ones where you alternate fasting days and non-fasting days. And so you have alternate day fasting, which is usually like one day of regular eating, and the next day is about 25% of what you eat, of what you would normally eat, and you kind of go back and forth. And then there's the 5-2 diet, if anybody's heard of that one, which is like 5 days a week you either eat normally or you have more of a time restricted window. And then 2 days a week you either fully fast or have a very, very small intake, like 25% or less of your calories. So all of these fall under intermittent fasting because you are intermittently fasting. Technically, any day of eating where you go a period of sleep without eating, you are also intermittently fasting in that day, because unless you are fed intravenously or by a tube overnight.
I was about to say.
I know.
I know some patients who are not intermittent fasting.
Which is some people, but the vast majority of humans are not fed that way. The vast majority of humans, outside of infants, let's say, they don't really intermittently fast. Those guys just eat whenever. But
a lot of their parents wish they would intermittent fast.
But yeah, so technically any day where you're sleeping and not eating, you are intermittently fasting for a good chunk of time. But these ones are more clear. Depending on the type of fasting that you do, you may see different metabolic changes. And it also depends too, is if you change what you're eating in that time as well. So we were talking about carbs and ketone bodies and that. So if you're doing an intermittent fasting low carb diet, you're much more likely to adapt to the ketones and to the fat burning, the fat being your main fuel, compared to someone who is doing like a regular diet just in a restricted window. Although overall, people who go longer periods of time during their days without eating anything, they do have a greater adaptation to use ketones than people who don't follow that kind of pattern. And it's a necessity, right? If your body is not getting food in, you're using ketones. Like overnight when you sleep, like if you eat your supper at 6 p.m., because that's when you always eat your supper, maybe it was a smaller supper than usual. Okay, so maybe you're like running a little low on glucose after that. Your body's going to make ketones overnight. If your body needs energy, and if you need to, it will make some ketones, right? It will release some glycogen, but it will also make ketones. So this is not something that bodies don't do unless you're in a fasting regimen. It's just that people who practice longer fasts on a regular basis, their bodies become more adept at switching back and forth between these pathways because they get more practice and they necessarily have to.
How long does the average person have to go without eating to start some of these processes? You were saying like it does happen overnight if you don't eat enough, but like so most people when they go in for fasting blood work or whatever, they ask you, has it been 8 or 12 hours? I know there's somewhere even if you fast too long, it doesn't count either. I ran into that once.
So there are some things where you do want to see like what your blood sugar is like if you haven't had any outside sugar coming in, right? Like how, and that tells us how your body is able to manage the sugar that's already there, right? How that system is working. However, if you wait a really long time and you happen to have a lot of glycogen in your liver, or you're a person whose liver makes a lot of glycogen, you can actually see like a high blood sugar after not having eaten for many hours because your liver goes, uh-oh, you're starving. Let me just dump as much sugar into your body as I can right now. And then the
livers are pro at that.
Livers, I mean, that's part of what keeps us alive, but for some of us, it's not helpful anymore, right? And then there's other things too, that prolonged fasting. So in people who have anorexia nervosa restrictive type, for example, their cholesterol levels actually are pretty bad sometimes. So you would think, well, they're not eating any, but because of the malnutrition and the overall dysfunction in the body and like these starvation mechanisms, cholesterol gets pretty high. So you wouldn't expect to see that in somebody who demographically, like age, sex, let's say, like whatever else risk factor wise, you wouldn't expect.
The third one is location.
Yes,
age, sex, location.
Yes, thank you. Someone that you wouldn't expect cholesterol levels like that, you'll see it, even though they've been eating very little. So there are some of those things that happen, but the the metabolic pathways are never a solid state. Like, oh, I'm only in glucose metabolism right now. Like, no, it doesn't work that way. You're always using different bits. So why does intermittent fasting get all this buzz compared to any other calorie deficit diet that's been out there ever? Well, one, it was never marketed originally as a calorie deficit, though most people end up in a calorie deficit by doing like intermittent fasting. Think about it. If you have 4 hours a day to eat, it's harder to get as much food in 4 hours a day. Like, you'd have to work pretty hard to do that, right? Especially if you were maybe somebody who was a grazer before that, or you tended your first meal and your your first eating and your last eating were quite far apart. So most people do tend to eat less on these on fasting type regimens. There's also a whole host of other things like the diet industry loves to do. They love to choose something and say, oh, this is now the holy grail and it's going to fix every health issue and it's going to make you live longer too. So the longevity people really love time restricted eating and fasting because of research in animals saying that when you semi-starve animals, they live a bit longer. And so the longevity folks, which also coincides with the manosphere very much.
It means that I, like God, do not play with dice and do not believe in coincidence.
They love it for that reason. So eat less, you'll live longer, which may or may not be true, but then it also, you have to think about values and preferences and how you want to live your life and what drives you every day. Again, I am not judging. I'm saying these are important things to think about when you make these kinds of decisions. So the longevity piece, maybe there's some talk that it might change how your body uses fat, especially if your eating aligns more with the circadian rhythm. So that circadian rhythm, that's basically that ingrained clock in our bodies that tell us that as humans, we're a species that gets up in the day and goes to bed at night. We're not nocturnal. That's that really instinctual level. But of course, that's not real life for a lot of people out there. That being said, though, there is some evidence saying that when your eating coincides more with those clock patterns, your metabolic functions be a little bit different. It might change how you store fat. If you do, it might change how your body regulates blood sugar, especially if you already have something like diabetes or metabolic syndrome where you're noticing that those systems are not working as well. That can be helpful. And that's particularly true when you are eating earlier in the day and not later in the day. So this is important info that we didn't have about 10 years ago when this got popular. And a lot of it was like, just skip breakfast or whatever, eat late in the day, because most people want to preserve that supper hour, right? That's especially if you're socializing or maybe you have a family or something. That makes sense from that perspective. And we started to learn that in terms of some of these metabolic benefits, the earlier eating windows, if you're going to have that shorter eating window, having it earlier in the day tends to be more helpful for things like blood sugar, and blood pressure is a little iffy with this one, but cholesterol levels and so on and so forth. So again, it's important to think about who you are, what's important to you, what your health situation is, what you want to do with that, and so on. There's also a lot of research that's done in non-human species. So I think this whole area, take it with a grain of salt. When we're looking at these long-term things for people, especially when the study subjects are like young, relatively healthy people, we got to wait a long time to see if they really do develop more heart disease, if they really do live longer or whatever. So be cautious, these kinds of things. And then, of course, there's lots of other claims about it being good for the gut microbiome. What isn't good for the gut microbiome, right? To me, that's always a little bit of a red flag that this might be a cure-all kind of situation. Your mileage may vary. These are things to know about what intermittent fasting does, what we know about it. We have way more data now than when it came out. And so I think it's more helpful to help people make these kinds of decisions. Ultimately, though, It only matters if you do it. So we need to look at adherence rates, right? Any medication, the most effective medication does not work if you do not take it, right? And I'm not calling this a medication. Please do not take it that way. But what I'm saying is, if people are doing things, like what's actually happening, right? We can come up with the best, quote unquote, healthiest, quote unquote, diet in the world. But if it's not something that people are actually going to do, then what's the point, right? So adherence rates vary. A large meta-analysis I was looking at today was saying that it's somewhere in the range of 80 to 85% for time-restricted eating. But those are averages, okay? And so that varies from between 60-ish% to 100% in the studies in there. And that's honestly higher than I thought it would be. Now, these studies only went up to about 12 months as well. And they did note that in the studies that looked at adherence at multiple time points, the subsequent time points in the studies were always lower than the initial time points. So what this tells us is that people don't keep doing this. This isn't to say that if you've kept doing it or you want to keep doing it, that you shouldn't. I'm not saying any of that. I'm saying that on the grand scale, this is not something that people in general have been adopting. And I think there's a lot of really good reasons for that. As a parent of young children, my children's eating window is longer than most of these eating windows. So I have to prepare food for them. My days are long because I'm caring for them and going to school and going to work and all of these things. So I'm awake longer, which means I'm hungry a lot of that time. I also want to model eating for them. They're learning to eat in the world, right? They're just trying to develop some of these things. And participating in family meals is something that we have found is an important value for our family. So I want to participate with that. So it would be very difficult to be like, I'm not going to eat supper with you ever. We don't eat every single meal together, but this is a part of our family life. So for a lot of people, that would be very difficult. And in our culture, like the evening meal is the larger meal. It is the family time for most people. It's a socializing time. And so depending on how your life is structured, you may or may not be able to actually allow for these kinds of things. And that seems to be one of the big issues with people. Unfortunately, this so often gets under the lens of willpower. And I think that is so unfair and disingenuous when you're talking about real life needs and cultural factors and community things where we socialize around food and we get community over food. Our species always has. This is like a fact of evolution here. I think it is unfair anytime someone's like, oh, it's just to your lack of willpower that you just eat that supper or you eat breakfast with your family. I'm like, that's baloney. And then, of course, people work jobs that require them to work at different hours, that they can't eat at regular eating times, that they work all night and they need to sleep during the day, that all kinds of things, right? So I don't even know what my point is with all of this. I think I've talked enough about intermittent fasting, but what I do want people to know is like, what's going on with it? What happens? And think carefully about yourself and your life and what different things mean for you. And there is always going to be an eating pattern or diet pattern that works for somebody, that fits their life, that fits their values, that fits. It just feels right. And that will probably not be the same for anybody else. So we all need to be aware of what works for us. And I guess the last thing would be anybody who tells you just don't eat for a week, don't believe them.
Or 260 whatever days it was.
249 days.
Jeez.
That is all. Thank you for exploring fasting with me, everybody. I think it's kind of wild that we haven't done a full episode on fasting at this stage in our podcasting life. So why don't we do a quick something nice? Is there anybody who would love to go first? I can always go first.
Sure.
Oh, I shouldn't have said that. My something nice is that I have found a way to both do one of my assignments and see a friend that I have a hard time coordinating with. It's a little something, but it is a nice something.
That's great.
That's always the dream. Like I'm getting something done, but I'm also doing it with people that I would rather spend time with than do the thing.
Exactly.
Hey, look, it's this podcast.
We have dozens of listeners, Jim. Dozens.
My something nice is kind of a mixed bag, but I will pick the nice part of it. I am currently spending 2 months on working internal medicine at St. Boniface Hospital. And that's tough. There was a 7-day period, first week of this rotation for me, where I worked 92 hours. There were 3 24-hour call shifts in there where, hypothetically, I could have got some sleep. I got, I believe, 3 1/4 hours between the 3 call shifts. So it's rough. However, my something nice is the time that being on call affords me to spend with patients and families who need me. During the day, when I'm in my normal 10, 11-hour shift on the ward, there is a lot that needs to get done. I need to see patients, we need to do our rounds, I need to arrange and follow up on investigations like lab work and imaging and like that. I need to call consulting services like psychiatry and neurology and hematology and oncology and all of those ologies. I need to call them and ask them to come see my patients and follow up on recommendations that they've made and like that. I need to eat sometimes. I need to run up and down the 6 flights of stairs between the ward and the emergency department when there's a consult or when we're bedlocked and so some of our patients aren't on the ward, they're still in the emergency department or whatever. There's lots that needs to happen during a normal shift, which means that when I'm seeing a patient in the morning, sometimes I only have a few minutes to get the critical stuff. Especially if the patient has some more active stuff going on, I'll try to follow up throughout the day. But what I'm saying is when I'm on call, there isn't all of that other normal stuff going on. I'm just addressing the issues. And that means that if somebody has a question or if a family member's in to ask how things are going, I can take that time. And I have all the time in the world. All it costs me is my sleep. to talk and to address issues with the patient and their family and like that. And that has led to some of the most rewarding experiences that I've had in medicine so far. So that's my something nice.
I'm sorry it comes at the expense of your sleep and sanity.
Right.
Well.
You need to take care of you too.
Yeah.
My something nice is that I have realized how overwhelmed I am with things that I have taken on, and I didn't want to quit any of them, but I have started the process of quitting some of my various jobs, and it's probably good for me.
Very good
hard.
for you.
Yeah, important but hard, right?
I am transitioning away from working for the church by summer, and I am even saying the words closing my Etsy shop is hard, but I might just jack up the prices to the point where nobody will buy anything.
Oh.
It is tough.
How are all those random people going to get that bootleg TARDIS sticker? Ashlyn's biggest seller is a bootleg TARDIS sticker that they
Not
drew.
bootleg, I drew it myself. They just haven't found it to take it down yet.
Well, good for you for making those hard decisions that will ultimately leave you with more to give and more to enjoy.
More weekends.
More weekends, yeah.
How about you, Lauren?
I have a something hopeful that hopefully I can report on as a something nice next month, but I can't say anything now, not just for a fear of it won't happen, but might go into a whole thing about my current employment, which is not in danger. Mother, I can hear you flinch right now.
All right, well,
it might be changing shortly, and I really hope so.
Okay, well, it's nice to have hope for new things, right?
And this has been a very trying week, so I will let people know that the cats are still adorable.
I'm very glad that the cats are still adorable for all of you. Marissa, what's your something nice?
Well, first of all, I got to see my long distance partner of 3.5 years for the first time in 5 months. Just this
Wow.
yeah. Normally it's every 6 to 8 weeks or so, and because of reasons beyond either one of our control, it was 5 months. And as a very unromantic, non-sentimental ice queen, as I'm sure you can tell I am, I handled it perfectly fine and barely noticed anything that happened.
Aww.
But the second part of that is the fact that I am a big Twin Peaks fan. And unfortunately, the day before I went out to Washington State, David Lynch died.
Yep.
And while I was planning on going up to Snoqualmie and North Bend anyway, it just so happened to be the weekend that he died, which meant that those small towns were not small town populations for that weekend. So while I couldn't go have a meal at the Double R like I had planned with my very special person, we did go by the Double R diner and saw the beautiful vigils and everybody who was out to pay their respects. And I have so much respect for David Lynch, especially as someone who was willing to have his own character say in a show, "Fix your heart or die," in reference to people who can't handle trans people. So it was a big loss, and anybody who can use their platform and their privilege to speak up for the marginalized at a time when they are in danger, I greatly appreciate.
Absolutely.
Yeah. To add a little bit of levity, the easiest way to look at the world situation right now is to get a window cling that says directed by David Lynch and just put it outside. And it makes a heck of a lot more sense.
Oh, that's excellent. That's helpful.
I also find it helpful to just randomly go, "There was a fish in the percolator."
Oh. Yeah.
Oh. Well, thanks for joining me, everyone, tonight. And thanks, Marissa, for joining us as our extra special guest.
Thank you for having me, as always.
It's always a pleasure.
All right.
Likewise.
And with that, we will sign off. So, everyone, have a good night.
Stay safe, folks.
Good night.
Show notes and references for all of our episodes are available at lueepodcast.com, where you can also find links to donate or get in touch. If you'd like to support the show, the best way to do that is with a review on Apple Podcasts, or wherever else you found us, or by sharing this episode with a friend.
Life. Don't talk to me about life.
My name is Laura Creek-Newman, and I can't even say my name. Sorry. And with me today, I have Lauren Bailey.
Hello.
Oh, shit.
Where's Lauren? No, we can hear Laura. We can't hear Laura.
Okay.
I said hello.
Oh, we did not hear you.
We did not hear you.
No, only the ghosts heard you.
The kittens looked up.
Marissa, I'm sorry. What's your last name again?
McCool.
McCool. Oh, God. I don't host these things. I don't know. I just tune out until we're all done this part.
It's eminently forgettable. I totally understand.
No, it's not. It's not. It's just...
It just betrays the fact that Laura does not actually listen to our podcast because
it is a true story.
Marissa's name is in it every day.
I know. I should have known that, and I just didn't. Anyway. Ashlyn. Oh my gosh, Timmy.
Hey, Timmy.
It's the
Hi,
word.
Timmy.
Demographically, like age, sex, let's say, like whatever else risk factor wise, you wouldn't expect.
The third one is location.
Yes,
age, sex, location.
Yes, thank you.
My ICQ number was 5833839.
Oh my goodness.
I don't remember.
I understood that reference.
Mine was 28278. Oh God, no, I don't remember.
I was more of an MSN person. I did have ICQ, but my friends and people gravitated more towards MSN.
I learned to type on MSN Messenger.
Yep. Oh man, we're so old.